52 supermarkets have already closed in New York City, gone, shuttered, dark windows where checkout lines used to be, and the government grocery store that was supposed to fix all of this has not opened a single door yet. Not one. The man who promised to feed this city is watching the food supply collapse in real time, and he has no answer for it. Because while Zohran Mamdani was out campaigning on a $3 grocery bag, the private sector was doing the math he refused to do. And the math is brutal. Tonight, you are going to see the number they buried, the warnings they ignored, and exactly who is going to pay the price when the last real supermarket on your block turns off its lights for good. There is a man in this city who spent 50 years building something from nothing, and right now, he is watching it disappear faster than anyone in City Hall is willing to admit. His name is John Katsimatis. His father came to America as a lighthouse keeper who ended up clearing tables as a busboy in New York. They settled in West Harlem with almost nothing. Katsimatis grew up, earned a nomination to West Point, turned it down, studied engineering, and then walked into a small grocery store on 137th Street to stack shelves for a friend's uncle. Something clicked. By 1971, he had his own store on the Upper West Side. One store. That was the beginning. Over the next 5 decades, he turned that single shop into the largest supermarket operation this city had ever seen. At its peak, his Red Apple Group controlled 78 locations under the Gristedes banner alone. Add the D'Agostino chain he later absorbed, and you are looking at well over 100 neighborhood supermarkets carrying his name across the 5 boroughs. A busboy's son, an empire built one grocery aisle at a time. Today, Katsimatis runs 17 Gristedes stores, 11 D'Agostinos, and 1 Food Town. 29 stores total, almost every single one clinging to Manhattan. From 78 down to 17 under just one banner. More than 50 supermarkets gone. 50 locations that used to employ workers, pay property taxes, stock shelves every morning, and feed actual families, vanished before Zohran Mamdani has opened a single government checkout lane, and the people running City Hall are not leading with that number. They are not putting it on a banner. They are not answering questions about it on camera, because that number destroys the entire story they are trying to sell you. Here is the story they want you to believe. New York City has a grocery access problem. Working families are being squeezed by high prices. The private sector failed them. So the government is stepping in to fix what the market broke. That is the pitch. That is the bumper sticker. That is what Mamdani ran on and what got him into Gracie Mansion this past January. A promise to open city-owned grocery stores in every borough by 2029, selling affordable food to New Yorkers who cannot make ends meet. It sounds compassionate. It sounds urgent. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing a mayor is supposed to do, except the moment you check the actual facts on the ground, the entire premise starts to crack, and it cracks fast. Start with the neighborhood where the first government store is going, East Harlem, La Marqueta. That is the chosen site. Now, East Harlem is a real community with real working families, and nobody is pretending that grocery bills are not painful right now. But here's what the city is not telling you when they announce that location. By one independent analysis, that neighborhood already has roughly 45 grocery stores within a 35-minute walk. 45. And New York City as a whole was ranked by an international study as the #1 major city in America for food access. Not a food desert. The opposite. The city with the best food access on the continent is about to spend $30 million in taxpayer money to open one government store in a neighborhood already surrounded by grocery options. That is not solving hunger. That is something else. And we are going to name exactly what it is before this is over. But let's go back to Katsimatis for a moment, because his response to Mamdani's plan was not quiet. When the mayor took office in January and the government grocery agenda moved from campaign promise to actual policy, Katsimatis did not stay behind closed doors. He went on Fox Business and drew a line in the sand. His exact words, if the city of New York is going socialist, he would definitely close, sell, move, or franchise the Gristedes locations. He said he was considering moving his entire corporate headquarters across the river to New Jersey. The man who built an empire in this city, who employed thousands of New Yorkers, who fed this city through blackouts and snowstorms and a pandemic, was now openly planning his exit. And then he picked up a pen. In a Wall Street Journal opinion piece, Katsimatis called the public grocery plan delusional. He warned it would collapse the food supply, kill private industry, and drag the city toward the breadlines of the old Soviet Union. Strong language from a man who arrived here with nothing and built everything. But City Hall waved it off, just a billionaire protecting his bottom line. That is what they said. That is what they wanted you to hear. Except Katsimatis was not the only one sounding the alarm. While he was grabbing headlines, the people who actually feed most of this city on a daily basis were making noise stories of their own, and their warning was louder, more personal, and far harder to dismiss. New York runs on bodegas. It runs on the corner store where a working mother buys bread at 11 at night, where a construction worker grabs coffee before sunrise, where a kid picks up a snack after school. These are not luxury businesses. They are the food infrastructure of working-class New York. Fernando Mateo, who leads the United Bodegas of America and speaks for roughly 25,000 member stores, stood publicly alongside Katsimatis and blasted the plan. The warning from the bodega world was direct and without political filter. A handful of government stores would not fix anything. They would bring long lines, operational chaos, and a market tilted so far against the small operator that survival becomes impossible. And here is the part that should stop you regardless of how you vote or what you think about government spending. The city-owned stores will pay no rent. They will pay no property taxes. But the bodega on your corner pays both every single month without exception. So does the Gristedes down the block. So does the family market that has been on that same street for 30 years. Picture what that actually means in practice. You have run a grocery store for 15 years. You pay rent. You pay property taxes. You pay for licenses, health inspections, liability insurance, and a payroll that does not stop whether business is good or slow. Your margin is razor thin because grocery retail is one of the most brutally competitive businesses in America. Then the government opens a store 2 blocks away that pays none of what you pay and sells below your cost because it is subsidized by the same tax dollars you contribute every year. How long do you last? You already know the answer. Now multiply that across thousands of small grocers across 5 boroughs. And remember, they are not stepping into a healthy, thriving market. The private grocery business is already in retreat. Stop and Shop has been closing locations. National chains are pulling back from urban markets. Real supermarkets with real infrastructure are disappearing on their own without any government competition accelerating the process. And into that already fragile, already shrinking market, the Mamdani administration wants to introduce a taxpayer-funded competitor that plays by a completely different set of rules. Rules that no private operator, no matter how efficient, no matter how experienced, can compete with. So the opposition was coming from the right. It was coming from small business. It was coming from one of the most powerful figures in New York's private economy. You would expect that kind of pressure to at least slow things down. You would expect City Hall to pause, to answer some hard questions, to show their math. But the most devastating blow to this entire plan did not come from a Republican. It did not come from a businessman protecting his stores. It came from somewhere that Mamdani cannot dismiss, cannot discredit, and cannot afford to ignore. And when you hear who said it and exactly what they said, you will understand why the administration has gone very, very quiet on the details. It's because the person who just called this plan out is the same person keeping New York City's budget from collapsing entirely. And what she said in 4 words just changed everything. 4 words. That is all it took. And those 4 words came from the last person Zohran Mamdani could afford to have say them. Not a Republican senator, not a conservative talk show host, not a Wall Street executive protecting his portfolio. The Democratic governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, the very woman who just handed Mamdani's city billions of dollars to keep its budget from falling apart, was asked directly about government-run grocery stores. Her answer was immediate and it was clean. I favor free enterprise. 4 words, no elaboration needed. The leader of Mamdani's own party, his own financial lifeline, the governor who controls the state money keeping City Hall's lights on, would not stand behind the centerpiece of his affordability agenda. And she did not stop at a slogan. Hochul went further, echoing what economists who have studied these experiments for decades have been saying all along. Government grocery stores have a pattern. They open, they struggle, they get hit by theft. They bleed money without the competitive pressure that forces a private grocer to fight for every single dollar. And then they close. That is not a prediction, that is a track record. And it is the same track record playing out nearly everywhere this model has ever been tried. So now, put the room together. You have a billionaire grocer watching more than 50 of his stores vanish and vowing publicly to close the rest. You have 25,000 bodega owners warning that the corner stores will not survive what is coming. You have 3 separate credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and Kroll, all moving New York City's financial outlook from stable to negative. And you have the governor of the mayor's own party, the woman keeping his budget alive, refusing to defend the plan on record. From the right, from small business, from Wall Street's own referees, and from the very top of the Democratic Party, the verdict is the same. And yet the administration did not stop. It did not pause. It did not go back to the drawing board. It locked in a site in East Harlem, then a second in the Bronx, and it kept promising a store in every borough by 2029 fine, as if none of those warnings existed, as if none of those voices were in the room. That tells you something, because when an administration ignores warnings from its own governor, from its own comptroller, from 3 credit agencies simultaneously, and from the largest private grocery operator in the city's history, it is not making a miscalculation. It is making a choice. And the question you have to sit with is this: who benefits from that choice? Because it is not the working family in East Harlem. It is not the bodega owner on 125th Street. And it is definitely not the taxpayer who is about to get handed a bill that nobody in City Hall is being straight about. Let's talk about that bill, because the financial picture behind this plan is the part they have buried the deepest, and it is the part that explains everything else. When Mamdani walked into City Hall this past January, he did not inherit a clean slate. He inherited a budget hole that the city's own independent watchdogs measured at more than $12 billion. $12 billion. That is not a rounding error. That is not a manageable gap that a few spending cuts can patch. That is one of the largest structural deficits this city has faced since the Great Recession. And that was the starting line, not the finish line. To close it, the administration did not find new revenue or cut wasteful spending in any meaningful way. It leaned on Albany. Governor Hochul and the state stepped in with roughly $4 billion in gap closing assistance, including a maneuver that delays billions in pension payments and pushes the true cost down the road for future administrations, future taxpayers, future New Yorkers who have no vote in any of this right now. Mamdani also floated a property tax increase that his own preliminary budget projected would raise $3.7 billion, a hit that lands directly on homeowners and, through their landlords, on renters who are already stretched to the limit. He later pulled that increase back under political pressure. But pulling back a tax proposal does not make the structural problem disappear. It just means the hole is still there and the answer to filling it is still unclear, and the people whose entire professional purpose is to measure exactly this were not reassured by any of it. Moody's moved New York City's outlook to negative for the first time since the pandemic. Fitch followed, Kroll followed. Their shared reasoning was simple, and it was damning. The city is on a path to spend more than it brings in, not just this year, not just next year, but for years to come. Projected shortfalls of $7 billion, then $9 billion, then approaching $10 billion in the years just ahead. Gaps that as a share of total spending are larger than almost anything this city has faced in a generation. A budget held together by a state bailout and one-time accounting maneuvers that the watchdogs are explicitly warning will not be available to repeat. And the city's own comptroller, Mark Levine, a Democrat, said it in 8 words that cut through every talking point and every press release. New York City is spending more money than it takes in. That is the man whose job is to count the money. That is what he said on the record. Sit with that. Sit with what it means that the government, now operating under those exact financial conditions, has decided that this is the right moment to get into the grocery business. Because here is what $30 million actually means inside a budget that is bleeding at the scale this one is bleeding. $30 million is what the city has projected it will cost to build the first government grocery store, one store. Roughly 9,000 square feet of retail space in East Harlem. $30 million for one location in a neighborhood that already has approximately 45 grocery options within a 35-minute walk. And that single store will consume nearly half of the entire $70 million budget set aside to open all 5 stores across all 5 boroughs. Half the budget, one store, in a city ranked #1 in America for food access. That math does not work in a spreadsheet. It does not work in a press conference. And it does not work on the ground in the communities that are supposed to benefit from it. But the number that should truly stop you is not 30 million. The number that should stop you is what comes after 30 million, because one store is never actually one store when the government is running the operation. There are staffing costs. There are union contracts. There are supply chain agreements that do not operate on private market efficiency. There are security costs in a city where retail theft has become one of the defining economic pressures destroying small grocery margins. There are administrative layers, oversight structures, and reporting requirements that do not exist when a family is running their own store, and their own livelihood depends on keeping costs under control. Every one of those costs lands on the taxpayer, and not one of them shows up in the $30 million construction headline that City Hall put in front of the cameras. Private grocers already operate on margins so thin that a single bad quarter can end a business that took a decade to build. The difference between surviving and closing is sometimes less than 2% of total revenue. That is the industry Mamdani is proposing to compete against, with a government operation that has no profit motive, no efficiency pressure, and no personal stake in whether the store actually works. And the private operators who understand those margins better than anyone alive are already making their decisions accordingly. They are not waiting around to see if the city makes it work. They are leaving. 52 stores already gone, more watching and calculating every single week. And here is where this stops being a New York story, because the playbook Mamdani is running did not originate in New York, and it will not end in New York. Atlanta already opened a city-owned grocery store. Chicago has explored the same model. Boston has had the same conversations. The language is identical in every city. High prices, a promise of a government solution, a private sector that quietly disappears while the cameras are pointed at the ribbon cutting. And in every city where this has moved forward, the same question eventually surfaces. The one question that the people running these programs have never been able to answer cleanly. Not in Atlanta, not in Chicago, not in any city that has tried to turn government into a grocer. And in New York, that question is about to get answered in the most expensive and most public way possible. Because there is one more piece of this story that nobody in the Mamdani administration has addressed. Not at a single press conference, not in a single budget document, not in a single public statement from anyone inside City Hall. And it is the piece that makes everything else make sense in a way that should genuinely alarm you. Because this was never really about the price of groceries. And the moment you see what it actually is about, you will not be able to unsee it.